Alright, today we're finally looking at the work of Icelandic artist, producer, fucking genius, Björk. Legendary figure in the music scene with an absolutely incredible discography that she pulled together after breaking away from her work with the Sugar Cubes, has dabbled in so many different genres: trip hop, art pop, electronic, glitch pop, tribal house, even post-industrial. Nothing seems to be off the table in terms of where she's willing to go with sound, and I really do mean it when I say she has an incredibly unique approach to music that's really unmatched by any other artist I have found up until this point. A lot of these albums have a grand orchestral presentation to them that's really reflected in the fact that she works with entire ensembles and choirs to assist in her producing of these albums, and yeah, let's just get right into it. Let's get this done. I find that I get a lot out of doing these best to worst. I have never done one in video form, but I have already done up to this point Radiohead, Kanye, and Animal Collective. I probably put the most of those into the Kanye one because it's my most recent one. The Radiohead was pretty lazy within the earlier days of my blog, but hopefully bringing this onto this channel will be successful because I find that I discover a lot about an artist and just like get a lot out of doing them. So yeah, I don't know, do I go best to worst? Do I go worst to best? I feel like it makes more sense to go best to worst because, like, if you've never heard of Björk before or something and you're watching this video, I would rather you check out, like, her best albums than her worst albums. Like, who wants to go from the ground up, you know? So let's just get right into it with what I feel is her best work. First, Vespertine. This is a 10 to me. You know those albums that you just think are never going to click with you? Like, it's not that you think that they're overrated, but you just never picture them really breaking into personal connection with you, like becoming an essential part of who you are and like the type of music that really you let define you as a person. That was Vespertine to me for so long. It's still pretty much been top of this list this entire time that I've had this draft going in my notes of my Björk best to worst, but it was never like, it never broke into being more than an album to me until about a week ago. Basically, you can so clearly tell that this is Björk tearing down all of her walls, letting go of her doubts, and giving into love. Which is wonderful in theory, and I think we need not discuss whether this is a wise decision on her part or on anyone's part, because this album communicates that theory well enough, and to me that's really what it's all about. This type of love that's completely vulnerable and almost like a fantasy that I think not a lot of us believe in, but we all just want to believe in. It has this delicacy and softness to it, but something about it feels so freeing. It's like it's telling you it's okay to love and to want to be loved in return, and it's not something that we have to put on the back burner or try to shut away. And the idea that something this emotionally releasing could be tied to something that is at times so pain-inducing and complicated as love is just a concept that I want to bury my fucking face in, even if it's not real for the 55 minutes that this album is on. And you can really feel in your chest every moment of this record, even if the vocabulary that she uses is sometimes very simple. Like, just look at a moment like the end of Pagan Poetry, where she repeats "I love him" over and over again, and the instrumentation to back it up just makes it feel like this grand statement. It's a smooth, polished listen that feels subtle, but at the same time every song is approached with an immense amount of care. The sonic palette has these dazzling, delicate synthesizers and spacey ambience, as well as raw, impassioned vocal performances, chilling, unsettling electronica that kind of pulsates next to these organic strings and expansive choral vocals. Hidden Place starts the album off on an exquisite note with these elegant and lavish vocal layers and almost trippy line of synthesizers, and as it progresses, throbbing, vibrating electronics are kind of added into the mix. It has this very wintry and majestic presentation that's definitely continued in the next song, Cocoon, whose vocal performance, soft, droning synthesizers, and a clicking background electronics probably make it one of the most beautiful songs I've ever heard about getting intimate with someone. The string plucking at the end of It's Not Up to You transitions delicately into Undo, which is maybe my favorite Björk song, period. Again, you can totally feel what she's saying when she says it's not meant to be a strife, it's not meant to be a struggle uphill. Low-key a moment that breaks me because it is a strife, and a lot of times it is a struggle uphill. Pretty ironic considering that's not what the song was meant to do. And the dazzling production of Pagan Poetry also has this thumping bass and distorted electronica and just dances out to the part where she's like, I love him again. Just one of the most stunning moments in Björk's discography, period. Frosty is this dancing shimmery interlude that fades into Aurora, which is similarly elegant but also is slightly fuzzier, has kind of a ringing noise going on in the background, and holy shit, those damn vocal performances are killer. Well, not killer, that was a terrible adjective to use, but like, oh my god, those vocal performances, dude. Heirloom has this clattering, steady drum and these vast layers of organ and synthesizers, and again, just a million fucking subtle elements, and it feels almost overwhelming to try to cover it all, yet it still has this softness and delicacy to it. Yeah, to me, full-on Vespertine is pretty much a perfect album. It's at number 1, and moving on, spot 2 goes to Homogenic, hands down. Uses strings on its sonic palette quite a lot, kind of has this spazzy schizoid style of production, the sense of atmosphere and all the reverb, but still dazzling beauty and gripping sense of darkness. Just the heart-wrenching depth and the emotion of this album is absolutely captured in the intensity of the instrumentation. It's very theatrical. It's one of her most expansive and interesting releases while still consistently sticking to a theme, and it has more incorporation of love, but with more of a clear sense of romantic fearlessness and confidence as opposed to a vulnerable or delicate album like Volta or Vespertine. And it's the perfect example of how simple compositions at their core can feel mind-bending or emotionally heart-wrenching when approached with the right amount of emotional conviction. It's easily one of Björk's most grandiose, orchestral, and multi-dimensional releases, and it makes perfect sense why this is top of the list for so many people. The opener to this album, Hunter, kind of has this sense of urgency with the strings and the ascending intensity in her vocals and the instrumentation and these glitchy electronic backings. Here's where the hot takes come in. There's definitely an elegant simplicity to the strings and rickety kick drum and passionate vocal performance of Yoga, but to me, it's not the album's best, nor should it be referred to as one of Björk's best moments by any means. It's still a great track, but I find that when people tell me that this is the best on the album or one of Björk's best songs, I'm like, yo, what the fuck? Have you heard Unravel? Okay? And that transitions perfectly into this song, which is criminally gorgeous. A descending whirlwind of electronics and spacey emotive strings, and Bachelorette, holy shit, just the thudding bass keys on the song and the elegant strings and pounding drums, delicate descending arpeggios just create this intense sense of foreboding. 5 Years is another one of those strangely bleak tracks. These crashing distorted drums play such a role in the sonic palette. Also, her vocal climax is insane. It just becomes so impassioned and it fades out with these twisted up like screeching strings. The ascending humming lead of Immature blends perfectly with the synthetic keys and the clicking electronics, and I also forgot to say that God, I love the lyrics to All Neon Like as well as Alarm Call, and as long as we're talking about Alarm Call, this feels like, to me at least, the most obviously trip-hoppy of any of the songs here. Straight up sounds like it could have come off of Mezzanine. Notice I'm wearing a Massive Attack shirt for this very occasion. I don't know, I think it's just the shifting, glitchy lead and bass that to me just totally calls to the genre, and Pluto is kind of like all skittish with these crunchy synths and backing instrumentation. Fucking intense, screaming, just like growling vocal performance. It ends with atmospheric synths kind of added in, and the fuzzy nature of the guitars increases in intensity, and all is full of love. Is an absolutely beautiful closer. It's very vast sounding with these organic and delicate strings. It's pretty hard to deny that this is an absolutely incredible moment for Björk, although I don't think it's a perfect album to me. It's about a 9 or probably a 9.5, but still definitely you cannot miss this album if you haven't checked it out, and definitely give it the time that it deserves to sink in. Number 3 to me is Volta, basically the documentation of her breakup with Matthew Barney. Everything about this album is just chillingly cold and empty, and its lyrics and production just all come together to just communicate the state of mind she's in, where words simply fail her. You can tell so clearly that she's stripped of life and just cannot focus on anything except the excruciating pain lane that she's in, and so much of this just feels like the audible version of spacing out, not knowing what to do with yourself, and just basically being drowned by this wall of utter heartbreak. And the production from Arca here kind of adds a spazzy electronic sort of influence that is much needed next to the heartbreakingly bleak string section. It's not really hard to tell that this is her most emotionally raw and vulnerable album to date, and I think the lyrics tend to be pretty blunt at times, but I think this is because her mind is blocked off and she's kind of struggling to acknowledge the reality of the situation, and she just feels so empty. And I would say conceptually it's probably one of her strongest releases, considering every single song has to do with a specific amount of time, either before or after the breakup occurred, and everything that was going through her head at that time. And again, the sonic palette is pretty simple at its core, but it is another perfect example of how when something's approached with the right amount of emotion, how compelling it can still be. The album's first two songs, Stonemilker and Lion Song, document moments before the breakup happened, and lines like "moments of clarity are so rare" show this uncertainty and the way that it's breaking her apart almost as much as the actual breakup would end up affecting her. And also the heavily filtered vocal effects in Lion Song definitely contribute to this cold, disconnected feeling. And where she says maybe he'll come out of this, maybe he won't, somehow I'm not too bothered either way, definitely stuck out to me. And I don't know why. I guess just the fact that he's made her feel this stressed and just uncertain and just dead inside has kind of killed her love for him too, and her ability to even care about what happens. Just God damn it. And the moment that History of Touches highlights is just so damn heart-wrenching in retrospect, and just the way that these moments are erased in time because people choose to kill them is just so weird to think about. And the layers upon layers of the brisk, flashy electronics is pretty much what the soundscape is dominated by, but it still feels like such a full and complete track. And Black Lake is just this abyss of mental pain that highlights the reality of life and the fact that this can happen to even the best of relationships. And it starts off all fast with these strings that fade out for a brief period of time, and then these off-putting vocal snippets kind of come in and the strings get all intense and loud as these bouncing bass notes thump along. And Family's earth-shattering drums and spacey, high-frequency ringing is broken up by fidgety, jittery strings and an entire abyss of choirs and spacey ambient instrumentation. Adam Dance has a vocal feature from Anohni, which I think pretty much plays out to its benefit. The production kind of dances along with these choppy string plucking and layers of spacey noise in the background from the twisted electronic and smoother, more fluid strings. I think one of the most interesting lyrical moments of this album is Mouth Mantra, and how she compares this physical vocal surgery that she's having with just the way that she feels so cut off and voiceless in what is happening to her. And overall, Volta, easily one of the rawest displays of emotions in Björk's catalog. I think it's probably a 9 out of 10, ended up third on my list, definitely one of my favorites. And moving on, fourth, we've got Post. You could say that this album is technically a little less cohesive than her other releases. It is a mixed bag, but I think it's mostly to this album's benefit. I mean, as far as compositions go, you can definitely see her versatility as an artist here. The straight electronic art pop sound is just something that Björk's known for. It's always going to complement her sound. It's never a bad idea to put on. The sound is pretty much what people know Björk for, and it's not hard to see why. It is such a lush, vibrant, and expansive soundscape. It's not one of her stranger, more off-putting moments, but it's just Björk doing what Björk does best. It's just a sugary, adorable album with themes of pure joy and romance, and pretty much embodies everything that makes the listening experience of a Björk album this grand thing that elaborates on the utter beauties of love. It's also got hints of trip-hop to its sound, considering that Tricky helped Björk with the production of this album. And getting right into it, Army of Me is just iconic. It's pretty hard to deny that this is one of Björk's highest points. The production is honestly like even a little bit sinister. It's got these like swirling, grimy layers of synths and descending, distorted bass in the chorus. Hyper Ballad is so delicately beautiful, again, hands down one of Björk's best moments, period. I love the lyrics that are like, I go through all this before you wake up so I can feel happier to be safe up here with you. The production slowly unfolds into a landscape of somber, polished electronics that get a little unsettling and trippy, backed by crashing percussion and it fades out with strings. Enjoys trembling layers of bass and drums pretty much dominate its whole soundscape. It almost feels a little bit industrial, and god, the vocal performance is just passionate as all hell, and the screeching horns that it closes out with very subtly in the end, oh my god, makes it one of the most important moments of Post. Possibly maybe subtle glitchy intro and distressingly somber lead is something that DJ Shadow would obviously go on to sample and introducing. Just had to mention that because y'all know I'm a sucker for introducing. Also has crisp guitars in it and these waves of backings that kind of creep through the song. It's one of the album's most otherworldly moments for sure. And then Cover Me kind of has this organic sounding plucking that then fades into the minimal sluggish lead of Headphones, which is one of the most unsettlingly down-tempo, just gorgeous closers to any Björk album. In this song, different elements kind of flutter around ever so subtly in the background, and the pounding drum and hazy layers of vocals make it absolutely feel like a closing note. And overall, oh, I forgot to say why I think this album is, say, an 8 or an 8.5 and not like a 10. Maybe this is also a hot take, but I personally feel that the kind of over-the-top presentation of a track like It's Oh So Quiet does stick out in the track list ever so slightly. I do kind of enjoy it when consumed on its own, when I'm in the mood. But overall, I don't really think that this cover had much of a place on this album, unfortunately. There are also a couple of moments that, despite having redeeming qualities, definitely feel a little bit less involved, like You've Been Flirting Again for one, although I do love the intention behind this song still. But still, I really, really enjoy this album. I think it's an album that's hard not to enjoy. It's kind of just an essential in anyone's music collection, I think. So yeah, please listen to Post, appreciate everything that it has to offer. And yeah, next up, Biophilia. This is also an 8 to me. I want people to stop giving Biophilia hate because it just hurts my heart every time. Biophilia is easily one of her best to me. Yes, this album does come across as very skeletal and simplistic at times, but it all complements her vocals so flawlessly, and pretty much every move made here for the most part is very tasteful. I mean, it combines the occasional dark, heart-thumping nocturnal moments with harp strings and natural, light, organic sounding elements. And just saying, it is an extremely conceptually cohesive album. I mean, considering every single one of the tracks here revolves around some sort of natural process of the world. How many other albums do you hear writing songs about tectonic plates or minerals or phases of the moon? Sorry for lighting changes, I'm assuming it's pretty obvious. It's been like 2 hours-ish. I had to just put all of my videos on my hard drive and also charge up my camera. This is a long video, but moving on, you can't really deny that this album also is just extremely inventive. Like, just look at the fact that it was initially released as an iPad app so that people could play an interactive role in the sounds being presented on this album, or the fact that Björk literally uses like personalized instruments on this album, such as the Gamma Leste, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, in Virus, or the Sharpsichord in Sacrifice, or the fact that she uses a sound from a Tesla coil in Thunderbolt. To me, this album isn't only bold and innovative in that sense, it's also just a transcendental sonic experience as well. I mean, if you just look at the chillingly beautiful harp sequences to the opening track, Moon, it's pretty minimal, but it sets the record off on a wonderful foot. Like I said, Thunderbolt literally uses the sound of a Tesla coil as the main component of its production, next to all of the rest of its fuzzy atmosphere and the layers of hazy vocals and kind of the minimal writing about Björk's just romantic sense of wonder. And Crystalline is such a banger. It uses this bouncy, delicate lead and an incredible vocal performance and hook and glitchy backings and drums which just erupt at the end of the track. Cosmogony is a little more subtle, but damn does it erupt into that chorus, and the ambient backings with the horns and the lavish choral vocal layers are absolutely stunning. Just like Virus's layers of shimmering instrumentation and vocal climax are effortlessly gorgeous. Sacrifice's sharp staccato lead almost feels a little bit menacing and takes a noticeably darker turn, and it gets overtaken by just this deafening cloud of distorted bass and sporadic drum. Also, low-key really like the lyrical approach about the sacrifices women have to make for the sake of love. Mutual Core has this ominous organ and earth-shattering electronic distortion with the ascending vocals in the build-ups. Definitely gives it a thrilling edge not really seen in other cuts here. Solstice is a pretty hazy but exquisite closer. It has simplistic plucking and just this melancholy tone in her vocals that attracts me towards it every time. The only cut in the track list I'm not 100% sold on is Hollow. It just feels a bit awkward. It doesn't really flow that well. It has this choppy staccato string lead and vocal performances that just feel a bit stiff, although I do like the fact that it's about your ancestors, your DNA, everything about you that makes you who you are biologically. The only other gripe I really have with this project is that it's just not quite as expansive or multidimensional as a lot of the cuts off Post or Homogenic or Vespertine. Still though, it's a pretty unique sonic experience that I recommend everyone check out for themselves. So moving on, number 6, Debut. The first project in Björk's solo career, and god, this thing just shows so much heart and potential and passion. It's just such a cute record, you know? Like, aw. Working in genres such as electronic and art pop and dance pop, also probably the most house influence of any other Björk albums. Just look at a track like Big Time Sensuality, and it probably has the fuzziest, most imperfect recordings, and it has a place in people's heart, which I definitely feel. It was really hard to choose which album actually was 6th and which was 7th. I mean, yeah, it is less consistent, less conceptually interesting than a lot of her other output, but god, I have such a hell of a good time listening to this album, and I know a lot of other people feel the same, and some of her best cuts, period, do land on this thing. I mean, Human Behavior is just so lit. From the clinking electronic production to the lyrics feels almost a little funky, groovy, and a fuzzy scratching closes this track out. Crying is also a jam. It has these bass piano keys and hi-hats and little glassy synthetic additions to its production, and Venus as a Boy's clacking drums. Clacking? Is clacking a word? I should probably look that up, but I'm not gonna look it up. It sounds right. And strings it's laced with watery fluid synthesizers and has maybe the cutest lyrics Björk's ever written. Like Someone in Love was the perfect track for Björk to cover. It has this shimmering harp and these atmospheric samples, honestly one of her most sentimental moments. And Big Time Sensuality, again, one of the more house influenced cuts, goes over so well. It has this groovy bass line and hi-hats and fruitful little synths, honestly one of the most expansive tracks on this album. And One Day's creeping synthesizers and sense of nocturnal atmosphere is absolutely sick. The steady percussion and horns that come in at the end definitely add to how sinister it feels. Here's the thing though, some of these cuts do feel kind of lazily put together, most namely songs like Come to Me or Violently Happy, and there's more to life than this. I enjoy while it's on, but I acknowledge that objectively it probably wasn't the best thing to put in this album. So to me that is a 7.5 out of 10, and moving on, number 7, we've got Medulla. This album is a mindfuck, and it's a fantastic idea, and it's really hard for me to put a finger on whether I feel what Björk was trying to pull off really worked. This album is almost entirely a cappella and serves as a demonstration of the versatility of the human voice. The production on each cut is mostly to entirely based on different vocal approaches, beatboxing, choirs, vocal samples, but still past this very inventive idea. I'm not 100% sold on the greatness of these songs when consumed by themselves. I feel like there could have been slightly more instrumentation to back up some of these cuts, and at the end of the day, why sacrifice the enjoyability of an album just to stick so tightly to a concept? And some tracks' arrangements are sort of cluttered or just boring. Still, it is probably Björk's most authoritative, self-assured, and boundary-pushing album to date, from the creepy, ominous undertones to the sinister and theatrical vocal performances. Whereas the Line is probably the most thunderous track here, with the deafening beatbox vocals and speedy drumming and Icelandic choral vocals that start a bit delicate but increase in intensity. Bokuro is a gripping poem read entirely in Icelandic, and although the production is pretty minimal, it almost feels soundtrack-esque, like I'm in some sort of epic adventure movie. Who Is It works as well, made up of all of these subtle layers that mesh very well together in a glitchy beatbox, and I love what she said about this track. She meant to put it on the end of Vespertine, but then that record felt so introverted, whereas this album is so much more out there and self-assured. And Submarine is chilling as hell. It has this menacing, foreboding atmosphere, and these vocals that eerily chant shake us out of the heavy deep sleep. Desired Constellation is pretty skeletal, with the fluttering sounds and very subtle ambience going on in the background, but it's easily one of the most effortlessly beautiful here. I have a love-hate relationship with a track like Ancestors. I mean, the structure of this song is really strange. It has these odd layers of like panting and these distressing keys, and it is such an out there moment for her, and definitely one of the more unique moments on the album. Another problem I do have with this album though is that in the second half a lot of the tracks kind of feel redundant to what's already been put on the table. I mean, she does kind of have a limited sound palette considering she's trying to do it all mostly mostly a cappella, but still a lot of these tracks do feel kind of cuttable to me. Still, this is a musical experience I can't compare to any others I've ever had before. And even though it is falling pretty low on my list, I think just for that, it is pretty essential that you check it out. So I'm gonna go ahead and give this a 7, maybe erring on the side of a 6.5. And moving on, number 8, Utopia. Now, this album, if for nothing else, has a special place in my heart because it was the first time that I ever showed anyone an album review I had written. It was literally like, hey guys, I don't like the new Björk album, please support my blog and future endeavors, like to all my high school friends that did not give any fucks. It was a great moment, and I'm glad I did that. And I just checked, and that day is December 1st, so that is my music journalism bursary, I suppose you could say. Also, just look at how fucking different the titles of my Google Drive files are as compared to then and now. Anyway, moving on to the actual content of this album, Utopia is this mesh between like choppy, glitchy electronics from Arca and instrumentals from a woodwind ensemble, as well as like samples from nature and birdsong. But god, the flow of this album is just so awkward. Like the first 5 tracks, when I went in to re-listen to this album, I thought that I would end up having a different opinion because it starts off on a pretty good note, but this album's bloated. This album moves to idea very awkwardly. It's also full of filler and probably Björk's weakest moments lyrically, but still, A Rise in My Senses is just this eruption of color and energy. It's a gorgeous, glimmering tone setter with a touch of glitchiness, transcendental vocal layers, a harp, kind of combines its art, pops out of Björk with almost like a Biophilia influenced natural sounding Björk, and I love the outro where the harp kind of takes over. The Gate though has grown on me quite a bit since I initially wrote that review, probably one of my favorite tracks here, and now I mean the layout is just so interesting, and the ascending line of watery fluid synths and the way that that makes way for the ambient soundscape to come in with the spazzy and glitchy elements as well. It's just so unique for Björk and really music in general. And then somewhere the album just takes a very wrong turn by throwing in flutes and birdsong. Not that I think that that would have been a terrible addition to the sound of this album, but I don't know why it just randomly comes in, and on tracks like Body Memory, God, all of the elements just crash together and fall flat on their face. Why the hell is this song 9 minutes long? I mean, the flutes just feel so choppy and messy, and the random animal samples are not helping at all, and neither are all of the suspenseful vocal layers. It's just a fucking chaotic clusterfuck of nothing. And after tracks like Courtship and Lost, which really introduce this idea of trying to just force 2 separate worlds together, not to her benefit, the tracklist just becomes entirely redundant and awkward. The rest of the tolerable moments on the record are honestly just boring, and I don't really come away from Utopia wanting to return to any tracks besides like A Rise in My Senses and The Gate every single time. So yeah, that's like a 4 to me probably. And moving on, Volta. The production on Volta definitely combines a lot of different ideas together. She uses a brass ensemble and works with Timbaland in the production here. She gets pretty political lyrically here as well. Volta is full of tribal and strange sound palettes, kind of tries to combine organic sounding horns with electronic and industrial elements and synthesizers and shit, and it works under some very specific circumstances, but the majority of the tracks here I just find to be a mess. And where the cuts don't strike me as a total mess, they strike me as boring. One example of where I feel like she does pull this off is on Earth Intruders. It's a decent enough opener. It's got driving electronic drums and dirty synthesizers, kind of heavily filtered, majestic background vocals, but how it fades out with just these messy ass droning brass instruments is questionable to say the least. And moving on, The Dull Flame of Desire, also one of my favorite tracks on the album. The Anohni feature definitely works really well, and the triumphant horns and subtle drums make it one of her most effortlessly compelling cuts, but still in the grand scheme of Björk, it's not her best track or one of her best either. And Innocence is kind of bizarre and mind-boggling. The chunky sample and all of the electronic industrial components totally crash together, but kind of in a good way. But besides this, there's no cut on this album that I would really want to dip my toes into after this video. Wanderlust doesn't really have a memorable hook, goes on for way too long, and the brass that comes in just totally clashes with the thumping drums and choppy electronics. And Vertebrae by Vertebrae really makes you think that something grand and majestic is about to happen, but it just comes across as so one-dimensional to me. The climax wasn't as conclusive as I wanted it to be, and it just kind of ruins what it had going for it. The drums do kind of get all twisted and distorted, and the horns switch up a bit, but besides that, ugh. Declare Independence is another one of those heavily industrial tracks, but god, the elements to the instrumental just do not mesh well at all. It's just really rickety and unstable and just does not feel right. And the weirdly polished elements and ambient backings to I See Who You Are just make it not feel like it fits on this project at all, other than like the horns in the outro, I guess. Overall, a fine idea. I'm sure if it had been approached from a slightly different angle, she could have pulled it off. Not a bad moment in her discography necessarily as well for a lot of people, but to me it is about a 4, maybe erring on the side of a 3.5. So yeah, that's how I feel about Björk's discography. Comment your ranking of her albums. Tell me how Utopia is way better than I'm giving it credit for. Yeah, maybe subscribe to my channel if you're feeling generous, and yeah, I will see you in the next video. Bye!